Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to reflect on one of the most turbulent and polarizing chapters in modern American history, the Trump presidency, a presidency that promised to make America great again, but now finds itself caught in storms of controversy, division, and growing uncertainty. The Trump presidency marked a period where the fault lines of American politics grew deeper than ever before, reflecting a nation divided not only by party affiliation, but by culture, ideology, and even perception of truth itself. Political polarization, though not new to the United States, reached levels that many scholars and citizens alike described as dangerous for the health of a democracy. Supporters of Donald Trump viewed him as a champion of forgotten voices, someone willing to challenge an elite political system that they felt had ignored ordinary Americans for decades. For them, Trump was a fighter, a leader who spoke plainly, often unfiltered, and who pushed back against what they saw as a hostile media, an entrenched establishment. On the other hand, his critics saw him as a divisive figure whose words and actions inflamed tensions, marginalized communities, and undermined long-standing democratic norms. The result was an America more fractured than it had been in generations. During his time in office, Trump's rhetoric often fueled this polarization. His frequent use of Twitter as a primary communication tool was unlike any president before him, offering direct access to millions of followers, but also bypassing traditional checks on political discourse. In doing so, he not only energized his base, but also provoked his opponents. The messages were often blunt, confrontational, and sometimes factually disputed, creating an environment where citizens no longer agreed on basic realities. For example, debates over immigration, election integrity, and the role of government were no longer disagreements over policy alone. They became moral and existential battles. Supporters believed they were defending the soul of the nation, while opponents believed they were protecting democracy itself from authoritarian tendencies. This dynamic created an atmosphere of perpetual conflict. The political polarization was also reflected in Congress. During Trump's presidency, bipartisan cooperation became almost non-existent. Legislative debates were often consumed by partisan loyalty, with Republicans largely rallying behind the president and Democrats positioning themselves firmly in opposition. The impeachment trials of Trump further deepened these divides, as they were viewed not only as legal and constitutional processes, but also as partisan struggles. Each side framed the trials in starkly different terms, one as a defense of the republic from corruption and abuse of power, the other as an illegitimate attempt to overturn the will of the voters. Such opposing narratives hardened divisions among elected officials and ordinary citizens alike. Outside of Washington, the polarization was visible in communities, workplaces, and even families. Political discussions increasingly turned into personal conflicts, with people cutting ties over their differing views on Trump. Social media amplified these divisions, creating echo chambers where individuals surrounded themselves with like-minded voices and demonized the other side. What made this polarization particularly troubling was its intensity. It was not simply about disagreeing over taxes or foreign policy, but about fundamentally different visions of what America should be. For some, Trump represented freedom, nationalism, and the restoration of traditional values. For others, he represented racism, authoritarianism, and the erosion of democratic principles. The Trump presidency did not create polarization from scratch, but it accelerated trends that had been growing for decades. Cultural battles over race, religion, gender, and national identity had long simmered beneath the surface. Trump's style of politics brought those battles to the forefront, forcing Americans to confront them in raw and often painful ways. His critics argue that he exploited divisions for political gain, while his supporters argued that he merely exposed truths that elites preferred to ignore. Regardless of interpretation, the result was a political climate defined more by confrontation than cooperation. The polarization during Trump's presidency revealed both the strength and fragility of the American system. On one hand, the ability of citizens to openly debate and protest showed the resilience of free expression. On the other, the inability to find common ground raised concerns about whether the country could function with such profound internal divisions. The Trump era became not just a political moment, but a cultural reckoning, demonstrating how fragile unity can be when political identity becomes inseparable from personal identity. The legacy of this polarization continues to shape the United States, reminding the world that democracy is not only about elections, but also about the ability of a society to sustain dialogue, compromise, and shared truth. The Trump presidency will be remembered as one of the most controversial in modern American history, not only because of its policies, but also because of the frequent scandals and legal battles that surrounded it. From the earliest days of his administration, Donald Trump found himself at the center of investigations, media storms, and public debates that often overshadowed his political agenda. His unconventional style of leadership, combined with a tendency to defy established political norms, created an atmosphere where controversy became almost a daily occurrence. While some supporters admired his ability to resist criticism and continue pushing forward, others saw the scandals as evidence of corruption, abuse of power, and a disregard for democratic values. One of the earliest and most significant controversies involved allegations of Russian interference in the 2016 election, and whether Trump's campaign had colluded with foreign actors. This led to the Mueller investigation, which consumed a large portion of his presidency and dominated headlines for years. While the investigation did not establish that Trump conspired with Russia, it did highlight instances of obstruction of justice and raised questions about the president's conduct. For his critics, the findings confirmed suspicions of unethical behavior, while for his supporters, the investigation was dismissed as a political witch hunt designed to undermine his legitimacy. The constant back and forth on this issue deepened national divides and kept the administration under a cloud of suspicion. Another major scandal came in the form of Trump's first impeachment trial in 2019. He was accused of abusing his power by pressuring Ukraine to investigate political rival Joe Biden while withholding military aid, and of obstructing Congress during the investigation. The impeachment process was highly publicized and further entrenched partisan lines as Democrats framed it as a necessary defense of the Constitution, while Republicans argued it was a baseless attempt to overturn an election result. Although Trump was acquitted by the Senate, the impeachment left a lasting mark on his presidency and reinforced the sense that he governed amid constant controversy. Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic was also a source of major criticism and scandal. His administration faced accusations of downplaying the virus, spreading misinformation, and failing to implement a cohesive national strategy. His public clashes with health experts like Dr. Anthony Fauci, along with his controversial remarks about potential treatments, drew international attention. For many Americans, the response to the pandemic became a symbol of leadership failure, while for others, it represented a president trying to balance public health with economic survival. This divide highlighted once again how controversies under Trump were interpreted in completely opposite ways by different parts of the population. In addition to these high-profile controversies, Trump's presidency was filled with smaller yet significant scandals that kept him in the spotlight. His refusal to release his tax returns, their long-standing questions about conflicts of interest related to his business empire, and allegations of profiting from the presidency through his hotels and properties all fuel debates about ethics in government. His frequent firings and reshuffling of key staff members also created the perception of chaos within the White House. Furthermore, his combative relationship with the press, often labeling unfavorable coverage as fake news, escalated tensions and reinforced the idea that his presidency thrived on conflict. The second impeachment trial in 2021, following the attack on the US Capitol by Trump supporters, marked the climax of controversy. He was charged with incitement of insurrection after encouraging a crowd to fight against the certification of the election results. Although he was again acquitted, the events of January 6th shocked the world and left many questioning whether the scandals of his presidency had crossed into unprecedented threats to democracy itself. The images of violence in the Capitol became one of the defining moments of his tenure and ensured that his legacy would forever be tied to political unrest. What set the Trump presidency apart was not only the number of controversies, but also the way they became central to the national conversation. Instead of fading quickly, each scandal seemed to intensify debates about who he was as a leader and what he represented for America. His ability to survive politically despite these challenges was remarkable. Yet the cost was a presidency constantly in turmoil, unable to escape the shadow of investigations, accusations, and crisis. For some, this resilience demonstrated strength. For others, it symbolized a dangerous erosion of accountability. Either way, the controversies and scandals of Trump's presidency ensured that it would stand as one of the most tumultuous periods in the history of the American Republic. The Trump presidency raised profound questions about the endurance of American democratic norms and institutions. While every administration faces its share of disagreements and political disputes, the years under Donald Trump were marked by a consistent challenge to long-held traditions that form the unwritten rules of governance. These norms, though not always codified into law, are essential for maintaining trust in institutions and ensuring that the presidency operates with respect for balance and accountability. Trump's approach often disrupted these norms, leading to both admiration from those who saw him as a disruptor of a broken system and alarm from those who feared his actions weakened the foundations of democracy. One of the clearest examples of this was his relationship with the media. Presidents in the past have had contentious dealings with the press, but Trump escalated this into open warfare by repeatedly labeling the media as the enemy of the people and dismissing unfavorable coverage as fake news. He undermined the role of the presses as a watchdog of democracy. For his supporters, this rhetoric exposed bias in mainstream journalism, while his critics saw it as an attempt to delegitimize an essential pillar of accountability. In a society where truth itself became contested, the challenge to democratic norms was evident in the struggle to maintain a shared understanding of facts. Another challenge lay in Trump's relationship with the judiciary and law enforcement. While presidents have traditionally respected the independence of these institutions, Trump often blurred those lines. He publicly criticized judges who ruled against his policies, called for loyalty from law enforcement officials, and expressed frustration with investigations that targeted his administration. His dismissal of FBI Director James Comey during the Russia probe exemplified concerns that he placed personal loyalty above institutional integrity. Such actions raised alarms that the checks and balances designed to limit presidential power were being weakened by a leader who viewed institutions through the lens of personal allegiance rather than constitutional duty. Trump's approach to the electoral system also drew unprecedented scrutiny. His repeated claims that the 2020 election was stolen, despite a lack of evidence, and repeated dismissals by courts, tested the resilience of democratic processes. For months, he encouraged supporters to distrust the electoral system, fueling skepticism about the legitimacy of elections themselves. This culminated in the events of January 6, 2021, when a mob stormed the U.S. Capitol in an effort to overturn the certification of results. For many, this represented the most direct assault on democratic norms in modern American history. It was not simply a dispute over policy, but a rejection of the peaceful transfer of power, a cornerstone of democracy. The Trump presidency also challenged norms of governance in terms of transparency and ethics. Unlike his predecessors, Trump refused to release his tax returns, breaking with decades of tradition designed to ensure financial accountability. His continued ownership of business interests while serving as president sparked accusations of conflicts of interest, particularly when foreign dignitaries and political allies stayed at Trump-owned properties. While not all of these actions were illegal, they tested the ethical expectations, helped ensure leaders prioritize national interest over personal gain. His style of governance, characterized by the use of social media as a primary tool of communication, also challenged conventional norms. Presidential communication, traditionally filtered through formal channels, was replaced with tweets that could move markets, insult rivals, or announce major policy decisions without consultation. This created a sense of instability and unpredictability as allies and opponents alike struggled to adapt to a president who treated governance as a continuous performance. While supporters praised his directness, critics argued that such behavior weakened the dignity of the presidency and destabilized international relations. Perhaps the most significant outcome of these challenges was the erosion of trust in democratic institutions. Polls consistently showed that Americans became more divided in their perceptions of the presidency, the courts, and even the electoral process. The Trump years demonstrated how fragile democratic norms can be when they rely on voluntary adherence rather than strict legal enforcement. What had once been considered unthinkable, such as questioning the legitimacy of an election or openly undermining independent institutions, became part of the national conversation. The Trump presidency revealed that democratic norms are not self-sustaining. They require leaders who are willing to respect boundaries, even when it is politically inconvenient. By consistently testing those boundaries, Trump forced the nation to confront the fragility of its own system. For some, his presidency was a necessary reckoning with institutions that had grown complacent. For others, it was a warning that democracy can erode from within, not only through laws, but through the steady weakening of the traditions and values that sustain it. The Trump presidency coincided with a series of domestic crises that tested the limits of leadership and exposed deep vulnerabilities within the United States. While every administration faces challenges, the scope and intensity of the crisis during Donald Trump's time in office were extraordinary. They're ranging from a global pandemic to social unrest and economic upheaval. His responses to these situations often polarized the public, with some praising his defiance of conventional approaches and others condemning what they saw as failures of responsibility. The way these crises unfolded and were managed shaped not only the trajectory of his presidency, but also the confidence of citizens in their government's ability to protect and guide them during turbulent times. The most defining domestic crisis of Trump's presidency was the COVID-19 pandemic. Beginning in early 2020, the virus spread rapidly, overwhelming hospitals, shutting down businesses, and reshaping everyday life. Trump initially downplayed the severity of the threat, suggesting it would disappear. With time, a stance that critics argued delayed crucial public health measures. His administration's mixed messaging, sometimes contradicting its own health experts, left Americans uncertain about what to believe. Controversial public remarks, such as suggesting unproven treatments, became a focal point of criticism. Yet, his supporters often pointed to the unprecedented speed of vaccine development under operation, warp speed as evidence of decisive leadership. Still, the pandemic highlighted gaps in federal coordination and raised questions about how leadership should balance public health with economic survival. Alongside the pandemic came significant economic disruption. The shutdowns led to widespread unemployment, with millions losing jobs and businesses closing permanently. For an administration that had previously celebrated economic growth and record stock market highs, the sudden downturn was a stark contrast. Trump pushed aggressively for reopening the economy, arguing that prolonged closures would do more damage than the virus itself. His critics accused him of prioritizing economic numbers over human lives, while his supporters applauded his efforts to restore normalcy and prevent further economic devastation. The economic crisis underscored the difficulty of governing in a moment where public health and financial stability were deeply intertwined. With every decision carrying enormous consequences, another major crisis was the surge in racial tensions and social unrest, particularly following the killing of George Floyd in 2020. Protests erupted across the nation, demanding justice and an end to systemic racism. Trump's response was marked by calls for law and order, deployment of federal forces in some cities, and strong rhetoric against protesters whom he often described as violent agitators. While this approach resonated with Americans who feared chaos and instability, it alienated many others who saw the moment as an opportunity for healing and reform. Instead of uniting the nation, his stance deepened divides, with critics arguing that he missed a critical chance to lead with empathy and bridge long-standing racial wounds. Domestic crises were not limited to the pandemic and social unrest. Natural disasters such as hurricanes and wildfires also tested the administration's crisis management. In some cases, Trump drew criticism for downplaying the severity of disasters or for controversial comments, such as during Hurricane Maria's aftermath in Puerto Rico, when he was accused of minimizing the death toll. These moments reinforced perceptions among opponents that he lacked the empathy and sensitivity traditionally expected in times of national hardship. His allies, however, defended his focus on efficiency and practical solutions rather than symbolic gestures. Underlying all these crises was Trump's distinctive style of leadership, his reliance on social media. Frequent attacks on political opponents, even in moments of national distress, and tendency to personalize issues gave his presidency a tone of constant confrontation. In times of crisis, citizens often look for reassurance, clarity, and stability. For some, Trump's direct and unapologetic style offered exactly that, a sense of strength in the face of adversity. For others, it magnified uncertainty and division, leaving the country without the steady hand needed to navigate turbulent waters. The domestic crisis of the Trump presidency highlighted the complexities of leadership in an era where information spreads rapidly. Partisan divides run deep, and public trust in institutions is fragile. His handling of these challenges became a reflection of broader debates about what effective leadership means. Is it about projecting strength at all costs, or about empathy and unity in the face of suffering? Trump embodied one vision, and the nation remains divided over whether that vision brought resilience or instability. These crises not only tested his presidency, but also exposed unresolved tensions within American society, ensuring that the debates surrounding his leadership will continue long after his time in office. The Trump presidency reshaped America's global reputation and foreign policy that were both dramatic and controversial. Central to his approach was the slogan, "America First," a philosophy that emphasized national interests over traditional alliances and multilateral commitments. For supporters, this strategy represented a long overdue correction to decades of foreign entanglements that had, in their view, drained American resources without sufficient return. For critics, however, it signaled a retreat from global leadership, weakening alliances and undermining the credibility of the United States on the world stage. The tension between these perspectives defined much of Trump's foreign policy legacy. One of the most visible shifts occurred in America's relationships with its traditional allies. Trump frequently criticized NATO, questioning why the United States should bear such a large share of defense spending. His demands that allies increase their financial contributions were seen by some as necessary pressure to create fairness within the alliance. While others viewed his rhetoric as damaging to trust among partners who had long relied on U.S. leadership, relations with European leaders such as Angela Merkel of Germany and Emmanuel Macron of France often appeared strained, with disagreements over trade, climate policy, and global security reflecting a broader sense that America was pulling away from its role as the anchor of the Western alliance. Trade policy was another defining feature of Trump's global strategy. He imposed tariffs on China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, framing these moves as protection for American workers and industries. The trade war with China, in particular, symbol his willingness to challenge the world's second largest economy, addressing issues of intellectual property theft, unfair trade practices, and the trade imbalance. While some praise this confrontational stance as bold and necessary, the tariffs also triggered retaliatory measures that hurt American farmers and businesses. Critics argued that his approach was erratic and undermined global economic stability, while supporters maintained that he was finally standing up to economic practices that had disadvantaged the United States for decades. Climate policy further altered America's global reputation. Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, arguing that it unfairly burdened American industries while letting other nations off the hook. This decision drew widespread international criticism and was interpreted by many as a rejection of global cooperation on one of the most pressing challenges of the century. Environmental advocates and allied governments expressed alarm, while Trump's base praised him for protecting American jobs and sovereignty. The withdrawal was symbolic of a larger theme in his presidency: the rejection of global frameworks in favor of unilateral decision-making. Trump's relationships with adversarial leaders also attracted significant attention. His summits with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un broke new ground, with Trump becoming the first sitting U.S. president to meet a North Korean leader face-to-face. While these meetings were historic, they produced little in terms of concrete denuclearization agreements, leaving many to question whether they achieved more symbolism than substance. Similarly, Trump's warm rhetoric toward Russian President Vladimir Putin drew criticism at home, particularly after the Helsinki summit, where he appeared to side with Putin's denials of election interference over the findings of U.S. intelligence agencies. These interactions fueled concerns that Trump's personal diplomacy weakened America's position against adversaries. The Middle East presented a more mixed record. Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, claiming it was flawed and insufficient in curbing Iran's ambitions. This decision heightened tensions in the region and risked further destabilization. Though his administration also brokered the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations. Supporters hailed these agreements as groundbreaking achievements in peacemaking, while critics argued that they bypassed the core issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Trump's foreign policy approach reflected his broader governing style: confrontational, unconventional, and centered on breaking with tradition. His actions won praise from those who believed the United States had been exploited by global institutions and foreign governments. But they also raised questions about America's long-term role as a stabilizing force in world affairs. Allies expressed uncertainty about whether they could rely on U.S. commitments there, while rivals tested the boundaries of American resolve. The Trump presidency left behind a world in which America's reputation had shifted significantly. To some, the country was stronger for standing its ground and refusing to play by old rules. To others, it was weaker, having alienated allies, emboldened adversaries, and withdrawn from leadership on critical global issues. The foreign policy choices of this era demonstrated how quickly a nation's image and influence can change when leadership embraces disruption over continuity, leaving a complex legacy that will shape debates about America's role in the world for years to come. The legacy of the Trump presidency is one of the most debated and complex in American history, marked by both enduring influence and deep controversy. Even after leaving office, Donald Trump continues to shape political discourse, party dynamics, and the way Americans think about leadership. His impact reaches beyond the policies enacted during his administration. It extends into cultural, institutional, and global dimensions that will influence the United States for years to come. Whether viewed as a populist reformer who gave voice to the forgotten or as a disruptive force who undermined democratic traditions, Trump's imprint on the nation is undeniable. One of the clearest aspects of his legacy is the transformation of the Republican Party. Trump reshaped the GOP into a movement centered more on loyalty to him than on traditional conservative ideology. Policies such as tax cuts and deregulation aligned with long-standing conservative priorities there. But Trump also introduced a populist and nationalist tone that resonated with many working class voters who had previously felt disconnected from politics. The result was a realignment of the Republican base, drawing strong support from rural and non-college educated Americans while alienating many suburban moderates. His enduring influence is evident in how Republican candidates continue to shape their campaigns around his approval and political style. Even years after his presidency, his impact on political culture is equally significant. Trump's uses of social media as a direct communication tool set a precedent for how leaders might bypass traditional media channels to reach the public. His combative rhetoric and willingness to break with decorum redefined the boundaries of political discourse, making politics feel more like a battleground than a forum for governance. For his supporters, this raw style was refreshing and authentic. For his critics, it normalized hostility and misinformation. The way Trump engaged with the public altered expectations of presidential behavior and raised questions about how future leaders will navigate the balance between authenticity and responsibility. Trump's presidency also left a legacy of judicial influence. Through his appointments, he reshaped the federal judiciary for decades to come, most notably by placing 3 justices on the Supreme Court. These appointments shifted the ideological balance of the court, influencing rulings on issues such as abortion, gun rights, and religious freedom. This judicial impact represents one of the most tangible and long-lasting elements of his presidency, ensuring that his influence will be felt in American law long after his time in office. At the same time, Trump's presidency intensified concerns about democratic resilience. His refusal to concede the 2020 elections and his role in spreading claims of widespread voter fraud left a lasting scar on trust in the electoral system. The events of January 6, 2021, when his supporters stormed the Capitol, became a defining moment that raised fears about the fragility of peaceful transfers of power. While some view this as an aberration in American democracy, others argue that it reflects a deeper erosion of norms that may continue to challenge the nation in the future. Trump's legacy in this regard is not simply about one man, but about the precedent he set for how leaders respond to electoral defeat. Internationally, Trump's foreign policy legacy remains contested. His emphasis on America first reshaped alliances and altered perceptions of the United States abroad. Some argue that he exposed the weaknesses of global institutions and forced allies to take greater responsibility for their own security. Others contend that he weakened America's global standing, leaving behind a world less certain of U.S. commitments. These shifts in perception will influence how future administrations approach diplomacy, trade, and security there, as well as how other nations calculate their strategies in relation to American power. Perhaps the most enduring impact of the Trump presidency lies in the way it has reshaped the national conversation about identity, culture, and the meaning of democracy itself. His presidency amplified debates about nationalism, race, immigration, and freedom of speech, forcing Americans to confront divisions that had long been simmering beneath the surface. These debates are not resolved and will continue to shape political life in the United States for years to come. Whether one views Trump as a catalyst for necessary disruption or as a destabilizing force, his presidency has left the nation at a crossroads, grappling with the future of its political system and values. In the end, the legacy of Donald Trump cannot be neatly categorized as purely positive or negative. It is a mixture of institutional change, cultural upheaval, and enduring influence that will remain central to the study of American politics for generations. His presidency redefined the boundaries of leadership and highlighted both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the American democratic experiment. The question that remains is how the nation will learn from this chapter, whether it will move toward greater resilience and unity or continue down a path of division and discord shaped by his lasting presence. The Trump presidency in trouble reflects more than the challenges of one leader. It symbolizes a nation grappling with deep divisions, shifting values, and fragile institutions. Throughout his tenure, Trump reshaped the political landscape, redefining Republican identity, challenging global alliances, and altering the tone of American political discourse. His time in office was marked by controversy, domestic crisis, and challenges to democratic norms, leaving both loyal supporters and determined critics with strong convictions about his legacy. Supporters saw a president who disrupted the status quo, fought for forgotten voices, and prioritized America's interests, while critics saw instability, polarization, and erosion of trust in institutions. Regardless of perspective, Trump's presidency has left a lasting impact on America's politics, culture, and reputation in the world. Its legacy is a cautionary tale and a call to reflection, reminding citizens that democracy depends not only on laws, but on shared values and responsibility.